That's little Amy here. I can't find anyone to come and talk to us while we're filming, but Amy's a bit sleepy. She might stay there anyway. This is a little food update. I realised there's a few things that have possibly changed and a few things that I've learnt this week doing some extra research that I wanted to pass on to you. The first one was something I didn't know about, is feeding mango. It's not recommended for male rats. Apparently there's some sort of enzyme or chemical that can cause possible kidney cancer in male rats. Now, also the same with papaya, and they're recommending that you don't feed that to male rats. So I've fed mango to my girls and they absolutely love it. So I think though if I had male rats I would, definitely avoid that. Avocados, something that we don't actually feed to ours. They say that the flesh is good, but avoid the flesh around the pit and the actual pit itself, and remove the skin because they're not so good for rats apparently. Artichokes I haven't fed before either, but apparently it's okay to feed onions and artichokes providing they're cooked first. So that's something that is cleared up a bit with the onion thing, that I wasn't so sure why we couldn't feed onions. Again, it's all to do with chemicals and enzymes and things. Avoid all citrus fruits, potential cancer link with rats. As far as I can see, that advice hasn't changed, so I would still avoid the citrus fruits. Cook all potatoes. I didn't mention ordinary potatoes because we don't actually give them. Our rats don't really like ordinary potato, they like sweet potato, but it definitely says all potatoes, including sweet potatoes, must be cooked. You should also cook beans, cabbage and Brussels, and we also cook the fresh garden peas, and we cook pumpkin, parsnips and swede and beetroot if we were given those. Couldn't find any advice about those last few, but definitely cook all potatoes, cabbage, Brussels and beans. The reason we cook the fresh garden peas is because I think they're meant to be very hard to digest if they're picked fresh from the garden, but of course the frozen ones are used for pea fishing and that's absolutely fine, not a problem with that. The apple and pear seed pips, that still stands. Avoid apple and pear pips, and the flesh around the actual core. We always peel them as well because of the amount of chemicals. We try and buy organic, but you can't always get organic, or you can't afford it because it's extortionately expensive. So especially if it's not organic, I would always remove the skin, because sometimes it's all sticky and horrible and you can't wash that off apparently, those chemicals on the skin. Rhubarb is still a no. It's high in a chemical which prevents calcium from being absorbed. Something else I didn't know because I don't ever feed it is tofu. If you buy it pre-packaged from the supermarket, it should be okay. But if you buy it from like the health food counter, apparently it's soaked in some sort of brine, and that can be absolutely full of bacteria, so you really don't want to feed that to your rats. Actually, I wouldn't even think you want to feed it to yourself. I don't think I would. All meat should be cooked, and that's for obvious reasons, for the bacteria and the different things that are carried in meat. So you wouldn't really want to eat raw meat yourself, and your rats definitely should never have it. We try to avoid dried foods that have, artificial colours added. We don't think that they're a very good idea either. And soya, apparently there's some evidence it prevents cancer in female rats, and as you know, we're using the science selective rat food for our older rats, and that is soya based. We couldn't get that for a long time, but we found some suppliers we can buy that from, which is helpful. And let me just think what we got here. Oh, chocolate. Yes, I still don't feed chocolate to my rats because we had a rescue rat who had been fed on chocolate and she had so many health problems, but she had also been fed crisps and all sorts of things that you wouldn't really want to give your rats. And on the advice of our vet, she doesn't actually, because she's seen some rats where they've been made quite unwell from chocolate, I guess, she sort of agrees with me that she wouldn't particularly want to feed it to her rats. But it's just a research. You have to do some research. because there is some research which says a small amount of dark chocolate can have health benefits for rats with respiratory infections and the mycoplasma, but then other people have said it didn't help their rat at all. So like all foods, if you're going to feed it to your rats, be aware any new food is a possible, could have an adverse reaction or an allergic reaction. Test a tiny bit of food first, and if you're going to feed a new food, feed it early in the day or when you're going to be around. Don't feed it just before you go to bed and then go and leave your rat, because you won't know if they're not well. The choking hazard foods are very much the same as I said before. I forgot to mention bread. Now, we never feed raw bread, and there is quite a few people agree with me on this. Bread is quite spongy and it can get stuck in the rat's throat, although I do know people who soak olive oil in bread to give to their rats and mice, and they swear by it. But we would always toast bread, and if you can always bake bread in the oven with a little bit of olive oil if you want to give your rats olive oil, and they really like little croutons. So that's just something you're going to have to decide for yourself, but I personally wouldn't give raw bread. Fresh, bread is in a slice of bread rather than baked or toasted. Raw dough, definitely not. Fresh grapes are still a choking hazard as far as I'm concerned, because I've experienced that with a rat myself. Luckily she managed to get rid of the grape herself, and ever since then we just don't give raw grapes. Raisins, actually I was reminded after I did the actual video that in small quantities they're okay. They're often found in the fruit and cereal honey bars that are specially designed for small animals. So our rats have had them, but only just in small quantities. I would still never give banana, a chunk of banana, but I have been told that it can be mashed up so it's quite runny and it's quite useful for mixing medicines. But definitely I would advise don't give a chunk of banana, it is a choking hazard. Peanut butter is still generally listed as a choking hazard. Yoghurt, a few people have asked me about. Yoghurt actually saved the life of one of my young rats who couldn't eat quite a few years ago now. So if you're going to feed yoghurt, make it a bio yoghurt, and not more than a teaspoonful a day maximum. It's very useful if rats are sick and on antibiotics. You've got ones that won't eat or anything. And what we did with a little young rat who'd been bitten by another rat at the same age as her, they'd had a squabble one night, and overnight this massive infection had appeared in her tummy, where she'd had this horrible bite and the abscess burst, and it was disgusting by the next morning. And we got her on antibiotics obviously, but we boiled up some water in the kettle, we left it to cool, and we stored it in a screw top jar in the fridge. She wouldn't eat any food or water at all. So what we would do is get equal quantities of the bio yogurt and the water and mix it together, and I slept by her cage for about a week, and I set my alarm for once an hour, and I got up and I got a couple of drops of this. I used to mix the yoghurt up fresh each time, so it was time consuming, but the yoghurt doesn't do too well if you mix it and then keep it. You've got to mix it up freshly. And I would just put a couple of drops on my finger, and she would just have this off my finger. And over the course of the first week she gradually got stronger, until by the end of the week she was eating again, and she was on antibiotics for 6 weeks altogether. My vet didn't think she would make it through the first few days, and I was just so upset at the thought of losing a baby rat. And I'm so pleased that we did persevere, because she lived for another 2.5 years, and all she had was a small scar on her tummy. So that is, as far as I'm concerned, bio yogurt is a little lifesaver. So that's that. And the other thing that I wanted to mention was the nuts. I wasn't sure why we shouldn't feed walnuts, because it was just something that had been on my list for about the last 15 years. Anyway, I did some research. Now, as you know, there's 2 types of nuts: ground nuts, which grow in the ground, and tree nuts that grow on trees. So the peanuts from in the ground, you might be aware a few years ago there was a big thing about sort of mould and funguses on peanuts. Well, apparently with walnuts and tree nuts, it's the same sort of thing, but a different type of mould, a toxin and mould and fungus that grows on the walnuts, and it is quite dangerous. Now, the general advice is not to feed raw nuts. All nuts should be roasted. Now with walnuts it's slightly different, because I know we've actually seen walnuts at Pets at Home in rat toys. So I'm a little bit concerned about walnuts. If the shell is nice and clean looking, I mean you can always scrub the shell off as well, but if they've got a shell that's got any of that black that you sometimes see on walnuts, I think that might be the mould they're talking about, and I would definitely not feed them anything like that. If you have a nice clean looking walnut, then it's up to you. If you fed them before and let your rats chew on the walnut shell, then that's up to you to make that decision. The other major thing is with the storage of nuts, that you don't want them in damp conditions, because that can encourage mould to grow. And the other thing I found was, I also would not feed this to my rats, but blue cheese with the mould on, definitely don't feed that. Other cheese in small quantities, not really the soft cheeses though, because they also have bacteria in them, but I think some people feed little bits of cheddar cheese. Mine have only had like the cheddar cheese treats, like the baked biscuit treats that you get. I've never given them fresh cheese. The other thing that can have mould is dried corn, seeds and grains. So you need to look at them closely and store them very closely. And I would have a look if you buy the dried corn on the cobs. Sometimes they look all dusty and funny. So if they look a bit dodgy, don't buy them. And I think that's probably, have I said everything that I wanted to say? I have notes today. I don't always have notes. I try and remember, but my brain is not as good as it used to be. So I think possibly, I've said tofu, I said that. I think berries and beetroot, this is something that's quite interesting. If you have small children, you'll probably already know this. But if you feed quite a lot of berries or beetroot to your rats, you might find you get up the next day and the bedding's all stained red. It doesn't mean they've all suddenly developed some nasty infection. It's just purely they've had too many berries and beetroot. So that's, before you panic, you should have a think about what you actually fed your rats the night before. Now I think that is possibly all I can say at the moment. If anyone knows anything else, just put a comment, or if there's any research that you found that could be useful to anyone, if you could just pop a note of that for us.